Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into some really fascinating source material. It takes a concept many people know, maybe mostly through sensationalized stuff, the number 666, the mark of the beast idea.
Right, but this offers a completely different perspective.
Exactly. Our source for this deep dive, it's an excerpt from a YouTube transcript. It has teachings attributed to Sheikh Nurjan Mirmati from the Mohammedan Way Sufi Realities channel.
Mm-hmm. And it lays out this unique framework for understanding, us, human beings, and our inner reality.
And our mission here. It's really to get a clear picture of this specific perspective, how it uses this idea of two fundamental triangles to describe us.
And how that structure connects to the journey, from a state of ignorance and negativity towards spiritual perfection.
Yeah, and we're sticking strictly to what this source provides, exploring what it says about our inner world and the path it outlines.
Okay, so the core concept here, which is pretty striking, is that human beings are fundamentally made of two triangles.
Two triangles.
Yeah. And the source says God Almighty intended for these two triangles to eventually form a perfected star.
Perfected star. Wow. That's quite an image to start with. So how does this structure work, these two triangles, according to the source?
It's described quite specifically. You've got an upper triangle and a lower triangle.
Okay.
And the source identifies the chest area as the dividing line, more or less. The upper triangle goes upwards from there. That represents the soul, the Ruh.
The soul. Got it.
And the lower triangle extends downwards. That represents the lower part of the body, the physicality.
Okay, soul above, lower body below, split at the chest.
Yeah.
Now, here's where it probably gets really interesting for a lot of listeners. Where does 666 fit into this?
Right. This is where the source makes a direct link, specifically to the lower triangle.
The lower one.
It explains that, a triangle has 3 angles, right? 60 degrees each.
Yeah, 180 total.
Exactly. But the source points out that in Arabic notation, historically, they didn't use 0 quite like we do now. There's a naught concept. So those 360s, they're seen not as 60, 60, 60, but as 6.6.
Ah, so it's reading the angles differently. 666 associated with that lower triangle.
Precisely. And that number becomes specifically tied to that lower reality.
Wow. Okay, that is a completely different take on 666 than, the common, often quite fearful ideas out there.
It really is.
So what are the components then of this lower triangle? According to this teaching, what does 666 represent inside us?
It's described as being made up fundamentally of ignorance.
Ignorance.
Specifically, this ignorance is said to run from the right to the heart. And the source argues that if this ignorance is present, it's not passive, it actively breeds anger in the heart.
Ignorance breeds anger.
And then, as a direct result of that anger, what comes out, what emanates from the lower body, is fire.
So the source is laying out this almost like an energetic chain reaction within that lower triangle. Mm-hmm. Ignorance leads to anger. Anger results in fire. That sounds intense.
It is. And a person who's really dominated by this lower triangle, by this state, the source characterizes them as being walking fire.
Walking fire.
Yeah, their physical body, their lower reality, it's just producing this fiery, negative energy.
And does the source connect this state, this walking fire thing, directly to how the material world often operates?
Oh, absolutely. It makes a pretty strong claim, actually, that the structure of the material world is often based on making people to be ignorant.
Ignorant about what specifically?
About their fundamental reality. Ignorant about their Lord, Allah Almighty. And crucially, ignorant about their own soul. This relentless focus on the here and the now, which the source puts very bluntly as just buy.
Right.
That's seen as a kind of mechanism designed to keep people locked in that state of ignorance, distracted.
So ignorance here sounds like it's much more than just, not knowing facts. What else does the source say about it?
It's portrayed as a really profound state of unawareness, like blindness or darkness. The source even calls it a dark cave.
A dark cave.
Yeah. It's not knowing why you're here, why you were created, or even understanding that you have a soul, what that means, what its potential is. And this deep state of not knowing, this darkness. The source says it, no doubt, is going to bring anger into the heart. It sees it as an inevitable outcome.
So this framework, it's not just presented as like a belief system you can choose to adopt or not. The source describes it as more inherent.
That's a really key emphasis in the source material. Yeah, it's described not just as a religious idea or something from a text, but as the physiology of our being.
Physiology.
Meaning it's presented as the fundamental way God Almighty created us. It implies we come with this built-in operating system and essentially an owner's manual for understanding and navigating it.
An owner's manual. I like that. Okay. And if someone lives mostly within this fiery lower reality, what does the source say happens to that soul's energy when the body dies?
The source is quite direct about that. It says the energy of a soul built on that fiery foundation, it will go without gravity towards the fire.
Without gravity.
Yeah, drawn into an abyss of fire. It's presented as the natural destination, the trajectory for energy that's been cultivated in that particular state.
That paints a very clear, maybe stark picture of the lower triangle state and its potential outcome. So how does the upper triangle offer a different path? A way out?
Well, the upper triangle is presented as exactly that, the path, the way, the mechanism to liberate the physicality of that lower triangle, to free yourself from its dominance.
Liberate the physicality, okay.
It relates to the upper body, as we said, but specifically the heart, cultivating the reality of the heart. The source indicates that all true spiritual practices, disciplines, they're aimed at this, working on the heart and the soul, the upper triangle.
So the focus shifts dramatically. It's not just about managing the physical body, but cultivating this inner spiritual core.
Precisely. The source uses a really practical analogy here. It says if all your effort goes into practices just for the physical body, you're basically just working a mule.
A mule?
Yeah. The mule gets tired, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't accomplish anything truly meaningful in the long run, and eventually it just goes back to the earth. The real work, the lasting work, according to this view, is on the soul. The energy that persists.
Right, the energy. So cultivating this upper triangle, the soul, that's the key to breaking free from that cycle. The ignorance, anger, fire cycle.
Yes. The source really stresses the necessity of finding some kind of discipline for the soul.
A discipline.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It doesn't insist on what that discipline must be called religion or something else, but the key is that it has to be something that genuinely teaches you about your soul, helps you understand it, and crucially, helps you leave that state of ignorance.
So the goal is to not die in ignorance.
Exactly. To avoid dying in ignorance, which is described as being like entering a void, a nothingness.
How does one actually do that? How do you embark on this discipline and feed the soul? What does that look like?
Well, the path involves actively seeking knowledge about the soul itself, understanding what it is, why it's here, how it's nourished.
Okay.
The source presents the soul fundamentally as energy. And energy, it says, cannot be destroyed. Unlike the physical body, which eventually returns to the dirt ashes to ashes and dust it does.
Right.
And it even, briefly, draws a parallel to modern physics. It mentions EMC2.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, just as an illustration, that when mass, the body ceases to exist in that form, the energy, the soul remains. And this energy, the source states, is either fiery light or divinely light. It takes on a quality.
Fiery light or divinely light, depending on how it was cultivated. So what are the practical ways the source suggests for cultivating that divine light?
Yeah.
Feeding the soul.
The source mentions methods like chanting, certain breathing practices, spiritual practice in a general sense, and importantly, praising and thanking the Creator, Allah Almighty. And it emphasizes this can be done in any language. It's the act itself. These actions are seen as actively giving your soul positive energy, counteracting the drain of focusing only on the physical or the material.
Okay, so what happens inside you, according to the source, as you start doing this, seeking this knowledge, engaging in these practices?
The result is described as a transformation. You begin to leave that ocean of ignorance.
Leaving the ocean.
Yeah. You start entering into light, learning to study light, understanding what the source calls your quantum reality.
Quantum reality.
Right. This nourishment for the soul, it comes through resonance. The source even mentions string theory briefly in this context.
Wow.
Suggesting that these practices create a kind of positive resonance that feeds and strengthens the energy you emanate, your soul's light.
So seeking this inner light and understanding, it starts to directly push back against the forces of that lower triangle.
Exactly. The source describes studying light and understanding the soul as actively extinguishing ignorance. It's like light literally putting out the darkness of ignorance.
Okay, so the ignorance starts to fade. What about the anger? The anger that came from the ignorance.
Well, when you're no longer shrouded in that darkness because you've started cultivating and studying light, the source says God Almighty begins to illuminate your heart.
Illuminate the heart.
Yeah. And this illumination, it isn't just a metaphor. It's described as a tangible light of faith that blossoms within the heart. And this light, crucially the source states, conquers anger.
So an illuminated heart.
Yeah.
It must perceive things differently, perceive the world yourself.
It has to, right. The source explains that an illuminated heart understands things differently. It sees the bigger picture, perhaps. And because of that understanding, it's able to put away anger.
Put away anger.
Yeah. So therefore, according to this teaching, real spiritual training isn't just about belief or rituals. It should actually result in a lower and lower amount of anger in your life, ideally leading to a state where you become devoid of anger.
And is this the path towards becoming that perfected star you mentioned at the beginning?
Yes, exactly. An illuminated heart filled with this light of faith and ultimately divine love that's described as reaching a state of perfection. And this perfected state, the source says, will put out the fire of all bad character.
So it extinguishes that fire from the lower triangle.
Right. The fire that originated from the ignorance and the anger in that lower reality, it brings it full circle.
Back to the initial analogy.
Right.
The perfected star made of the two triangles, now harmonized.
Precisely. This whole process, illuminating and perfecting the upper reality, that's how one conquers and extinguishes all those lower desires and negative characteristics associated with the lower triangle. And the source connects this beautifully, mentioning the example of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, how he described his companions as natural stars.
Natural stars.
And the source interprets this not just as a nice symbol, but as meaning they had actually been taught and had successfully lived this reality. They perfected their upper selves to conquer their lower selves. They achieved that balance, that stardom.
So at its absolute core, this perspective frames the central struggle of human existence as entirely internal.
Fundamentally, yes. The source explicitly calls this work, this journey of cultivating the upper triangle to conquer the lower one, the greatest battle that one can enter. It's the ultimate struggle against oneself.
This framework, then, from Sheikh Nurjan Miramati, it really offers a specific kind of map, doesn't it? For understanding these internal states we all experience: ignorance, anger, desire.
Yeah, and it provides a clear, actionable path based on cultivating the soul, moving towards a state of light, peace, and eventually perfection.
It gives such a unique lens for viewing both our own inner struggles and maybe the pressures we feel from the material world outside.
Absolutely. It takes a concept like 6666, which can be loaded with fear, and reframes it entirely as a representation of an internal state we can actually work on and move beyond. It offers a path out through spiritual effort.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? This deep dive into this particular source material suggests something quite profound. That the fight against negativity, against inner discord, it isn't primarily something external happening to us.
Right. It's framed here as an inner battle, represented by these two fundamental aspects of our being, that lower triangle of potential ignorance, anger, and fire, and the upper triangle of the soul's potential for brilliant light.
It really leaves us with a powerful thought to consider, doesn't it?
Definitely. If, as this source suggests, the soul is this essential energy, and that energy takes on a specific state, a quality either fiery and, destructive light, or divine and illuminating light based entirely on how we cultivate it day in and day out.
Then how conscious are we truly being about what we're feeding that essential energy within us every single day?
It's a framework that certainly invites some deep reflection on our daily actions, our thoughts, our focus, and their very real impact on our innermost reality. Are we building towards fire or cultivating light?